But I want us to start off the gadget block. We have to talk about this. We have to cover this. A study came out recently talking about the spyware that's pre-installed on Chinese phones, listed specifically OnePlus, Oppo, and Xiaomi phones. The study is looking at the data transmission behavior of different apps installed on those three brands. The study draws very specific conclusions, and most of the articles that I've seen on this study ignore the conclusions. I'm not going to call out specific articles. OnePlus was mentioned in this study as stealing your data and sending it off to China. Now, should we recommend OnePlus phones? That's a question. That's a question I can put in the title of a video or in the title of an article. Is OnePlus stealing your data? Are they? We got to know what's going on with it. If only there was some way to know what the differences might have been between an international version of a Realme or an Oppo or a OnePlus and a Chinese version of one of those phones. It's just such a shame that something like that doesn't exist, except for the fact that in the study, that exact thing exists. That's the whole point of the study. The study is called Android OS Privacy Under the Loop, A Tale from the East. So I've got a link to the PDF in the show notes this week. Just read the study. The study examines all of that pearl clutching, so concerned, are Chinese phones stealing our data moments? The study draws the conclusions for people who are shopping Chinese manufactured phones that are being provisioned, that have specific differences in software, and being distributed to other regions around the globe, especially a phone that's destined for Europe, where it would have to comply with GDPR and other consumer protection regulations for how the data on that phone is being managed. So here, let me go back into screen share. I think I've got the part of the paragraph that I'm looking for. Combined, so this is talking about personally identifiable information, abbreviated in the study as PII. Combined, this information poses serious risks of user de-anonymization and extensive tracking, particularly since in China, every phone number is registered under a citizen ID. Moreover, the data collection behaviors do not change when the devices move outside of China, despite potentially being under jurisdictions where users should benefit from stronger data protection, meaning that phone vendors and some third parties are still able to track business travelers and students studying abroad, including the foreign contacts they make on their visits. And this is the part that I love, because remember, we had all that pearl clutching. But what if it's happening on other phones and not just Chinese sold phones? Well, in the introduction to the study, we perform a cross-regional analysis and compare the pre-installed system apps on the Chinese and global Android OS distributions from the same OS developers. We find that the number of pre-installed third-party apps on Chinese OS distributions is 3 to 4 times larger than for the corresponding global OS distribution, and that these are given 8 to 10 times as many permissions as third-party apps in global distributions, including many more permissions classed as dangerous. You don't even need to read the study. In the introduction to the study, they give you some of the conclusion. This study is incredibly helpful. 2 incredibly important ideas. If you have family or friends who are concerned about their data behavior being tracked in China, they are not safe from that kind of data tracking and identifying personally identifiable information when they leave China. Whatever they do on their phone has to be the same if they're in another region of the world, unless they get a different phone when they're in a different region. That data security matters. That is an important idea to extend and to make sure that people understand, like, hey, if you're traveling to, Europe, if you're still using the same phone that you have in China, these apps and services are going to still link your behavior to the accounts and services on your phone, and that can be very easily identified as you. It's very easy to identify you on a Chinese phone with these services. The study mentions, we always talk about the data security and the data privacy on smartphones, but almost always through the lens of European behavior. When we look at how Chinese phones operate, handle your information, and whether that information can fingerprint you digitally, that is a critical idea to extend. That's fair. And we should absolutely be concerned for the well-being of those people who fit that criteria. The second really critical part of the study, though, shows that when we initiate better regulatory action over consumer privacy and consumer security, it does have a positive impact on phones sold in other regions. A OnePlus phone with OnePlus global software being sent to the EU has to comply with local regulations as to how your data is being managed. But if we're going to get out of the xenophobia of Chinese phone bad because China steal your data, I mean, look through some of this. They're talking about what the ethical ramifications of this are, what the threat models are, the setup, how they're conducting this test where they're trying to create these little analysis pockets where they can see what information is being sent. None of this is a mystery. If you ever encounter a tech article that's like, oh, but what might be happening? Well, there's a way to test it. It's not magic. You can analyze the information that goes into and out of a computer, and you can assess what the threat of that might be. But it's not an unknown, especially for tech blogs. They should not be reacting to the headlines of OnePlus is stealing your data, because that is absolutely not what the final conclusion of this study is. So, and it wasn't the point of it wasn't the focus of the testing either. The focus was, what do Chinese phones do for the data of Chinese citizens? To spoil the ending of this study, spoilers, if you want to skip the spoilers, go to this time code. In this work, we studied the Chinese version of the Android OS distributions run by Xiaomi, Realme, and OnePlus handsets. We measure the network traffic the handsets generate when in use by a privacy-aware consumer. We find that these devices come bundled with a number of third-party applications, some of which are granted dangerous runtime permissions by default without user consent, and transmit traffic containing a broad range of geolocation, user profile, and social relationship PII to both phone vendors and third-party domains, without notifying the user or offering the choice to opt out. In contrast, the data shared by the global version of the firmware is mostly limited to device-specific information. Our study therefore highlights major differences in terms of how privacy provisions are enforced in different regions. So if you catch a tech blog that's trying to make OnePlus sound scary, or are they doing this? The answer is no. I know we have difficulty in our field with user retention. I know some people really have a hard time lasting more than 30 seconds through a YouTube short to get to a piece of information. But if you can make it to the last line of this conclusion, our study therefore highlights major differences in terms of how privacy provisions are enforced in different regions. And you walk away from that going, oh, but what if? What if OnePlus is doing something sneaky with your data? I was in a conversation with someone on YouTube, but what about this? And what are your thoughts on this, Juan? And again, it always comes with that confrontation. I need you to defend your positive review of a OnePlus because I saw an article that OnePlus was stealing all my data. If you did read the article, you definitely didn't read the study, because the study points to a trend in our data privacy and data security policies that seems to be working. Do we need to refine? Absolutely. Do I believe that there is fundamentally more risk on a OnePlus? No. But this is a huge consumer education point. This is a huge opportunity to teach people out of what this study has to offer. And then the second part of this, which is more important to Chinese audiences that might not have access to the study, is to say, hey, just If you're concerned about what you say or do in China, you should also be concerned what you say or do on your phone when you're out of China. It kind of starts reeking of that little bit of xenophobia. And from there, we can also talk about those ways that we can make our regulations even better for consumer protections. There are absolutely holes in how our regulations protect consumers, but we won't get there if you're misrepresenting what the study actually said. Dave Burns, speak for yourself. I'm a moron. And I guarantee you, I'm going to have people that aren't going to listen to what I say in this video. They're not going to have watched this podcast. They're not going to have read through any part of the study, but their feelings were confirmed by the headline that they saw on Twitter, and they're going to go out there and say, "Oh, but Juan, you're just defending an indefensible business practice." Because the title of this article also tells you a different story. Think about all of the headlines that you've seen talking about this study. Is OnePlus stealing your data? Are Chinese phones trafficking your data? Android OS privacy under the loop, a tale from the East. The name of the study indicates we're talking about Eastern phones, like phones from China. And in the title of the study, you immediately already have a different sense of what data is going to be communicated than any of the article headlines that I've seen talking about Chinese phones stealing or hacking your data. Because Chinese manufactured phones, that doesn't mean anything. What matters is where the phone is going to be sold and distributed.